In the spring of 1945, as Europe erupted in celebration of liberation, Winston Churchill saw not peace, but the shadow of a new storm. He watched the Red Army's relentless advance, not as allies, but as a potential new, formidable threat. The euphoria of VE Day quickly curdled for him into a deep-seated fear of Soviet domination. He understood that while one tyranny had fallen, another, equally menacing, might rise to fill the vacuum. His resolve hardened, convinced that this peace was merely a dangerous pause. Just weeks after Nazi Germany's surrender, Churchill tasked his Joint Planning Staff with a chilling directive: prepare for war against the Soviet Union. The result was Operation Unthinkable, a preemptive strike plan dated May 22, 1945. It outlined a scenario where 47 British and American divisions, bolstered by rearmed German forces, would launch an attack on Soviet lines. The goal wasn't just containment, but to impose the will of the United States and the British Empire on Russia. It was a gamble of unprecedented scale. The core premise was a surprise attack on June 18, 1945, pushing into Soviet-occupied Germany and Poland. Planners acknowledged immense risks, the sheer numerical superiority of the Red Army and the logistical nightmare of such an offensive. General Sir Hastings Ismay, Churchill's chief of staff, famously concluded the operation was militarily impracticable. Yet, the very act of planning it revealed the depths of mistrust already poisoning the Allied victory. The peace was fragile, built on shifting sands, and held together by the thinnest of threads. What if Churchill's fervent argument swayed a reluctant President Truman, convincing him that the Soviet threat was immediate and existential? Imagine the order given. On June 18, 1945, instead of demobilization, the Allied forces in Germany would pivot. The massive propaganda machines, previously focused on Nazis, would shift to demonizing Stalin and his regime. The world, exhausted by 6 long years of war, would be plunged back into conflict, not against fascism, but against its former savior. The cheers of victory would be replaced by the ominous rumble of tanks. The initial Allied thrust, featuring divisions fresh from conquering Nazi Germany, would likely achieve some tactical success. The element of surprise, however fleeting, could push Soviet forces back along key sectors in northern Germany. However, the Soviet army, battle-hardened and numerically superior, would quickly absorb the shock. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, a master strategist, would rally his forces, turning a retreat into a brutal, grinding counter-offensive. The vast plains of Eastern Europe would once again become a killing field, but this time, the flags were tragically different. The Red Army, having fought from Stalingrad to Berlin, possessed not only vast numbers, estimated at 11 million men, but also a profound resilience and an intimate knowledge of attritional warfare. Their deep defensive lines and willingness to absorb staggering casualties would frustrate the Allied advance. Furthermore, Soviet industry, despite wartime losses, was still churning out tanks and artillery at an alarming rate. The Western Allies, already looking to send troops home, would face a formidable and seemingly endless foe, far from their own industrial heartlands and eager for peace. The conflict wouldn't be confined to Europe. Soviet proxies and communist movements in Asia, already gaining strength, would launch offensives, drawing in American and British resources. China, still embroiled in civil war, would become a new battleground as the Soviets supported Mao Zedong. The logistical strain on the Western Allies, fighting a truly global war against a determined ideological adversary, would become immense. The initial optimism would quickly fade, replaced by the grim reality of a war without a foreseeable end, stretching global capabilities to their breaking point. The United States possessed a decisive, terrifying advantage: the atomic bomb. Dropping it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had ended the Pacific War just weeks prior. Would Truman consider its use against Soviet cities to break the stalemate in Europe? The moral implications, after just witnessing the devastation of conventional war, would be immense. But if the war dragged on, costing millions more lives, the pressure to deploy this ultimate weapon could become overwhelming. The world would teeter on the brink of unimaginable destruction, a Cold War turning terrifyingly, catastrophically hot. Whether ending in a brutal stalemate, a limited nuclear exchange, or a long, drawn-out grind, the hypothetical Operation Unthinkable would have reshaped the 20th century irrevocably. Europe would be utterly devastated, perhaps permanently divided along new, even harsher ideological lines. The United Nations, barely born, would be stillborn, its promise of global cooperation shattered. Colonial empires, already weakening, would collapse faster amidst the chaos, replaced by a multitude of new, often Soviet-aligned, states. The demographic cost would be catastrophic, dwarfing even World War II's casualties. Decades later, the world emerging from this alternate 1945 conflict would be profoundly different. Trust between nations would be shattered beyond repair, replaced by entrenched animosity. Militarism would be paramount, security the overriding concern for every nation. The Cold War we know would either be avoided entirely, replaced by open conflict, or become an even more hostile, heavily armed standoff between two deeply traumatized blocs. The dream of a peaceful, cooperative post-war order would have died on the plains of Germany, leaving behind a legacy of fear and suspicion that continues to shape global politics to this day.